Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch, everyone. I am Wendy Griffith. Well, the world is watching Iran right now after the killing of its nuclear mastermind. It's the third assassination of a top Iranian official this year, and Iran is expected to retaliate. Heather Sells has more.
Iran is vowing revenge after the assassination on Friday of its top nuclear scientist. The only question being just how and when that revenge might take place. In a full state funeral, Iran bestowed martyr status on Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. The assassination took place just outside of Tehran. An Iranian journalist citing national officials said the ambush began with a car bomb and then machine guns opened fire on the car with the scientist and his bodyguards. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack, but Iran's foreign minister is blaming Israel, and Iran's president is pledging retaliation.
At the right time, the relevant officials will respond to this crime.
The attack marks the third assassination of a prominent Iranian public figure this year. In January, the U.S. killed military General Qasem Soleimani in an airstrike. In August, the second highest leader of al-Qaeda was taken out in the streets of Tehran. Several intelligence reports show the responsibility lies with Israeli Mossad agents acting on behalf of the U.S. But Iran's revenge now is complicated by the expected incoming Biden administration and its proposal to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal and possibly provide sanctions relief. Avenging the death could make a return to the deal more difficult. An Iranian newspaper suggested Iran attack the Israeli port city of Haifa in order to inflict heavy human casualties. The IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Aviv Kohavi, visited Iran's northern border and said, "Our message is clear. We will remain fully prepared against any manifestation of aggression against us." Amos Yadlin, former chief of Israel's military intelligence, sees two main options for Iranian leaders: wait for a potential Biden administration or retaliate now.
They can use their proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, or their Shia militia in Syria or Iraq, and they can go to an extreme step, which is launching missiles from Iran.
Former Obama CIA director and Biden supporter John Brennan blasted the assassination and cautioned against revenge, tweeting, "Iranian leaders would be wise to wait for the return of responsible American leadership on the global stage and to resist the urge to respond against perceived culprits." For now, the region is waiting and watching for any response and to see if it puts the Middle East on the brink of war. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thanks, Heather. President Trump's campaign has sent a fifth request to the Georgia Secretary of State asking for a signature audit on absentee ballots. Trump's team believes anywhere between 38,000 and 45,000 illegal votes from the absentee ballots alone were cast in the state of Georgia, which is far beyond the Biden-Harris ticket's current margin of 12,670 votes. The campaign also says it has substantial evidence of other violations of Georgia's election code and numerous other serious discrepancies in voting across the state. Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, wrote, quote, "Until the signatures are matched, the vote count in Georgia is a complete fraud. There is no way of knowing which ballots are honest and which ballots are fraudulent." Well, the president himself spoke out again Sunday, saying the election was rigged against him. As Dale Hurd reports, President Trump says he'll keep fighting to prove it in the courts.
In his first interview since the election, President Trump says he remains convinced the 2020 presidential election was stolen.
This election was rigged. This election was a total fraud, and it continues to be as they hide. And the problem we have, we go to judges and people don't want to get involved.
And the president's legal team and its allies have now lost, by one count, at least 31 cases contesting the election or alleging fraud. The bad news is piling up. A recount in Wisconsin, requested and paid for by the Trump campaign, again shows a Biden victory in the state. An appeals court in Pennsylvania turned down a request to not certify the election results, while the state Supreme Court rejected a motion to toss mail-in ballots. However, a group of Pennsylvania Republican lawmakers did announce Saturday they'll introduce a resolution calling on state leaders to withdraw certification of the vote and appoint a new slate of electors to cast the state's electoral college votes. Despite all the allegations of election fraud, Trump's former cybersecurity chief told 60 Minutes the election was the most secure in American history.
We can go on and on with all the farcical claims that alleging interference in the 2020 election, but the proof is in the ballots.
But the president pointed to victories in congressional races and state legislatures as evidence that the numbers aren't adding up.
Well, look, we're supposed to lose seats. We didn't lose one seat, and we gained many, and others were leading in others.
The Senate remains up for grabs, with 2 Georgia races yet to be decided. Despite harsh criticism of the Republican Secretary of State and governor, the president said he will campaign in Georgia and is urging supporters not to boycott the runoff elections.
So I'll be going there on Saturday night, and maybe I'll go twice. It's very important that we win those races.
Joe Biden's biggest problem at the moment is a fractured right foot, injured while playing with his dog. He'll likely need to wear a walking boot for several weeks. President Trump tweeted, "Get well soon." And the president says he will leave office if the Electoral College elects Biden, but he's still holding out hope.
Is there a path to victory?
Yeah, I hope so, for the good of the country. It will take a brave judge or a brave legislature.
In the meantime, the presidential transition process is going forward as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris get their first intelligence briefing today. The Electoral College is set to convene 2 weeks from today, December 14. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. One of the heated runoff races in Georgia could influence who controls the Senate. An old sermon by one of the candidates is stirring things up. CBN's Eric Phillips breaks it down for us.
The runoff election between Democrat Reverend Raphael Warnock and Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler will factor greatly in determining the balance of power in the Senate. It's why everything is on the line right now, including a sermon Reverend Warnock preached 9 years ago. This is the part of the 2011 sermon creating ire on the right.
America, nobody can serve God and the military. You can't serve God and money. You cannot serve God and mammon at the same time. America, choose ye this day whom you will serve.
The words prompting harsh rebuke from Warnock's Republican opponent, Kelly Loeffler, who tweeted, "Reverend Warnock, you owe every active duty military service member and veteran an apology. Shameful." RNC spokesperson Liz Harrington called the sermon insulting.
In fact, this nation was founded on brave men and women willing to enter into the fray and fight for our freedoms and sacrifice so much.
I think it's unfortunate and shameful that they are trying to distort not only my message, but the message of Scripture.
Warnock defended his words during this virtual press conference.
What I was expressing was the fact that as a person of faith, my ultimate allegiance is to God. And therefore, whatever else that I may commit myself to, it has to be built on a spiritual foundation. It is a spiritual lesson that is basic and foundational for people of faith.
More criticism came the same week after this tweet from Reverend Warnock, which said, "I will always fight for reproductive justice." Former NFL player and devout pro-life Christian Benjamin Watson clapped back, "Pastor, equal access to kill a son or daughter is not justice."
I think these statements are a pattern by Mr. Warnock that shows very outside of the mainstream views that he holds that I think are too extreme and too radical for Georgia, but too radical for the majority of Americans as well.
Warnock explained during the press conference that he has many veterans in his congregation who heard that sermon back in 2011, and they weren't confused about the message. He also said previously that the right to choose, or reproductive justice as he calls it, is a part of health care, which he says is a human right. He says government should not interfere with that decision-making process, and he says that is consistent with his view as a Christian minister. Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Thanks, Eric. Well, as COVID cases continue to rise across the country, a breakthrough for another vaccine waiting to hit the market. Moderna is filing for emergency use authorization of its vaccine, which has a 94% efficacy rate. It is the second company to offer a vaccine behind Pfizer, which is also seeking emergency use authorization. Pfizer's vaccine requires specialized freezer storage, while Moderna says theirs can be stored in regular freezers for 6 months and a refrigerator for 30 days. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control plan to meet tomorrow to discuss who will be first to be vaccinated once the vaccines are available. The CDC has to consider the process for allotting and administering the vaccines. Meanwhile, some good news. Evangelist Franklin Graham says the pandemic is causing more people to turn to Jesus. Graham told the Christian Post that his two ministries, Samaritan's Purse and the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, saw 1.7 million people accept Jesus Christ through online ministries this year. Graham said people are scared and afraid. When you give them the hope we have in Jesus Christ, they're eager to accept that. When the world turns upside down is when they're eager to listen. It's God who touches people's hearts and opens people's eyes. The pandemic has not stopped it. If anything, it's advanced it. Coming up, details on a secret ranking system Facebook is accused of using to suppress conservative outlets following the election.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline, Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
Facebook is under fire again for alleged bias against conservatives, this time for reportedly making an emergency change to its algorithm to suppress content from what it called hyper-partisan outlets. FaithWire.com's Trey Goins-Phillips is here with more on this story. Trey, tell us what Facebook did after the election.
So, like you mentioned, right after the election several weeks ago now, Facebook actually implemented what they're calling an emergency change into their algorithms, intended to weed out what they described as hyper-partisan news outlets to create a Facebook feed that is more based on what they argue is an objective, is based off of objective news sources.
Well, are they considering making the change permanent?
So there have actually been several Facebook employees that have said that they really like the feed, they really like the change now, and a higher up executive said that this is just a temporary change. It was not intended to be permanent, but they're studying it and seeing what kind of impact it has. But like I said, lower level staffers are saying that they like the quote nicer news feed. So there's the possibility that it will be made permanent.
Nicer in whose opinion, though, right? So Facebook is doing this in what they believe is an effort to curb disinformation. But isn't that really leaving room for a lot of bias and, of course, censorship?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest concern as far as the bias is the fact that it uses, the algorithms uses a metric that makes outlets like the New York Times and CNN objective. They list those as objective news outlets, and a lot of people obviously believe our mainstream outlets to be left-leaning and biased. So when we see those outlets, when the algorithms see those outlets as objective and they become the standard bearer, then more conservative outlets, or even outlets potentially like something like CBN or FaithWire could potentially be weeded out as biased, even though they're obviously just providing information.
So when you say weeded out, so that means, if that means certain people just aren't receiving that feed anymore.
Yeah, correct. It means that those outlets could be lowered down or suppressed in exchange for an outlet like CNN or like the New York Times.
So are conservative groups fighting back? Is anyone fighting back against this?
So I think this is just a part of a continued trend. So conservatives have been fighting this issue and will continue to fight this issue in hearings on Capitol Hill with the conservative senators who are trying to hold these leaders like Jack Dorsey at Twitter and Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook to account for their decisions. So I think at this point, it's just we need to continue to have transparency and make it obvious that these social media platforms are censoring conservative voices, even though they see it as just promoting objective news. The byproduct of these decisions is censorship of conservative outlets.
Well, like you said, they've already been called to Capitol Hill, and they've already talked to senators on Capitol Hill, Twitter and Facebook executives. So what can we do, the consumers of Twitter and Facebook, to fight back?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of alternatives crop up, like Parler is kind of an alternative to Twitter that's starting to crop up, and we've got other mediums. People are not relying as much on Facebook and Twitter perhaps for their news, and they're going directly to the source, like directly to FaithWire or directly to CBN or whatever outlets you might read. And I think that's really what's going to end up happening, is that people will eventually just get tired of the censorship and stop going to those platforms and just go straight to the source they trust.
Absolutely. That's what I've been doing, and heading over to Parler as well.
Yeah.
Trey Goins-Phillips with faithwire.com. Thanks so much for your time. God bless.
Thank you.
And you can catch FaithWire's Faith versus Culture tonight on the CBN News Channel at 8:30 Eastern. Still ahead, uniting the church so it can heal and lead the way in healing the nation from its cultural and political divide.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
And ministering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to CBNNewsChannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
The Bible says a house divided cannot stand, and it's a truth related to our nation and the American church. The turmoil following the presidential election can be seen in our streets and in our churches. CBN's Charlene Aaron takes a look at what it will take to bring us all back together.
A recent national headline pointed out that many of today's churches mirror the country's political divide. Pastors say it's an issue of growing concern at a time when unity and healing are needed in Washington and beyond. Dr. Ed Stetzer of the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College maintains when politics causes people to see one another as enemies, the church cannot afford to follow suit.
At the end of the day, the people that I'm in the body of Christ with need one another. And I think one of the things that we don't want is to bite and devour one another, the scriptures talk about, right?
Pastor Dan Backens of New Life Church in Virginia Beach points out that believers, both Republican and Democrat, share a faith that encourages love for one's neighbor.
In the church, in the house of God, we have a higher ideal, and that is to say, we may not agree, but we can love each other. And both sides of an issue, I think, should both take steps towards friendship.
As many take a political hard line, Backens cautions against potentially threatening the church's witness. Case in point, Christian author Trillia Newbell posted an online prayer asking God to watch over President Trump. When she did the same for Vice President Biden, it led to this response. She followed up with this tweet: "I'm troubled for all my non-Christian friends on Facebook who see professed Christians say this stuff over a politically neutral Christian discipline."
This zeal has caused a radicalism on both sides. And when you get radicalized, it's hard to be reasoned with you. So I appeal to the church that's kind of in the middle and pastors to speak up, and let's all commit to being bridge builders and peacemakers.
His message to believers who voted in this election?
I would say to the person that's really holding out for Mr. Trump, I say, that's okay. Pray and intercede. If it doesn't happen, like King David, he prayed for his son to live, and he didn't. He didn't get what he wanted. So what did he do? He got up, he washed himself, he worshiped, and he went home. Go on worshiping God and go home. And the other side, if Biden is the winner, don't have triumphalism and point your finger at the guys that lost.
Dr. A.R. Bernard of the Cultural Christian Center in Brooklyn also looks to Scripture.
That God works everything in accordance with his purposes, no matter who's in power. If we believe in the sovereignty of God, God is sovereign at all time, whether it's our chosen candidate in power or someone that we would not choose.
Faith leaders point to humility and understanding as keys to bridging the gap.
The anger of the world cannot avail the righteousness of God. And anger, and most anger, 95% of anger is unrighteous anger. That angry spirit doesn't make consensus. It doesn't make unity.
Prayer is also vital.
I think anger is not a call to action. Anger is a call to prayer, because prayer is where we elevate the heart and mind to God. We allow him to lift us out of the circumstance and situation and get his lens on the situation, get his perspective on it. And it frees us from the anxieties that are associated with anger.
Meanwhile, Stetzer's desire is that the church comes together as one, regardless of who occupies the White House.
At the end of the day, there's a bloody cross and an empty tomb, right? Jesus has been raised from the dead, and that same Jesus who's been raised from the dead dwells in us. And if he dwells in us, that brings us together.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
After the break, it's the most wonderful time of the year, how the Vatican is preparing for Christmas.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
And finally, the Thanksgiving holiday is over, and now Christians everywhere are preparing to celebrate Christmas. The Vatican had crews out. Look at this, putting up a 30-meter high Christmas tree. This year, the tree was brought from Slovenia, cut down and donated from a region known for its beautiful pine forests. The tree is 75 years old and weighs 7 tons. Oh my goodness. A nativity scene with larger-than-life ceramic statues was also donated to the Holy City. So the Vatican getting ready for Christmas, and I'm sure it will be lovely. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about what you've seen today. Email us at newswatch@cbn.com. Bye-bye.